Emily's shift at the Indigo Room began like every other Wednesday night, when she slipped through the service door at 4:47 in the afternoon, 14 minutes before the restaurant officially opened its doors to Charleston's upper-class patrons. She tied her long brown hair into a neat bun, secured it with the pearl clip her grandmother, Margaret, had given her 7 years earlier, back in the days when the older woman could still tell stories without relying on scribbled notes. The uniform still hung a little loose on Emily's frame, not because she had grown thinner, but because 60-hour workweeks left little room for anything but survival. Her wages barely covered her mother Diane's medication and the $3,800 a month charged by Clearwater Senior Care, the nursing home 40 minutes outside the city that never sent a late bill. That morning, before coming to work, Emily had stopped by to visit her mother, as she always did 3 times a week, on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays. Diane had been lucid that day. She recognized Emily's face, though their relationship seemed to exist only as a faint outline in her fading memory. They sat together in the facility's recreation room, where the sharp smell of industrial disinfectant always overpowered something humbler, sadder, something Emily had long since taught herself not to name. "You work too hard," Diane said, her trembling hands fussing with the hem of her cardigan. Her fingers were always moving, as if searching for some small task to anchor her to the present. "I'm fine, Mom. What matters is that you're comfortable," Emily replied. Diane nodded, but Emily caught that brief flicker of guilt in her mother's eyes, the understanding that her own existence demanded someone else's sacrifice. That awareness coexisted with the confusion that claimed more of her mind each day, like 2 parallel realities that could never merge. Emily had stopped trying to predict when the fog would descend. It came and went according to its own rhythm, untouched by logic or fairness. When she stepped into the restaurant kitchen, where the rhythm of knives and pans filled the air, the head chef, Marcus, didn't bother to look up. He had spent 15 years cooking in New York and held the usual disdain for waitstaff. Emily didn't take it personally. She saw it as part of the profession, like gravity, or the inevitable turning of Monday into Tuesday. She picked up her order pad and silently memorized the evening's specials. With Valentine's Day approaching, couples had begun to test restaurants before choosing one for their romantic dinners. The Indigo Room was where people came to see and be seen, a place where power flowed quietly through measured conversation, fine wine, and artfully plated dishes. Before taking her position, Emily reached for her perfume. The bottle was kept in her locker, wrapped in a small velvet pouch, its fragile glass more suited to a museum than to a staff changing room beside a kitchen. It was a legacy from her grandmother, given to her 2 months before Margaret was placed in hospice, those brief, lucid hours between doses of pain medication when she could still speak clearly. Margaret had told Emily that when someone recognized the scent, she would understand something about their family and the reason her grandmother had spent a lifetime keeping her safe. Emily had only worn the perfume a few times since Margaret's passing, but tonight she dabbed it on her wrists and at the base of her neck, where her pulse beat faintly beneath pale skin. The scent was strange, not entirely floral, though flowers were its quiet core. Its warm, woody undertone recalled the air of an old library or a centuries-old chapel. It deepened as it mingled with her skin, changing with every breath, like a small symphony forever rearranging itself. By 5 o'clock, the restaurant was nearly half full. Emily moved gracefully through the dining room, placing water glasses at precise angles, handing out menus with her left hand, describing dishes to curious but cautious guests. She observed everything from a distance, yet her mind drifted back to Diane, to duty, to fragility, to the chain of choices that had led her here, and to the perfume bottle, the wordless message her grandmother had left behind, waiting for someone to recognize it. If you're still listening, perhaps you too feel something in the way Margaret once looked at Emily, a quiet trust, an inheritance, and a secret waiting to be revealed. Before we step into the next chapter of this story, take a moment to subscribe to our channel, click like, and share this video so we can bring you more heartfelt, meaningful stories every day. I'd truly love to know, where are you listening from? Leave a comment below with your city or country, so we'll know that Emily's journey and the legacy her grandmother left behind have reached your heart wherever you are in the world. Emily stepped out of the kitchen, set her order pad on the counter, and leaned against it, her eyes fixed on the perfume bottle in her hand. The memory of Margaret came rushing back, so vivid it felt as though her grandmother were still there, in that bright hospice room where sunlight streamed through the curtains and touched the fine lines on her face. Margaret had called Emily to her side one quiet afternoon, when the room smelled faintly of pain medication, tissues, and the fresh roses Emily had brought. Her voice was weak but steady, as she told Emily there were things she needed to know, just not yet, but that the time would come when she would understand their worth. She opened a small dark blue velvet box, placed the glass bottle carefully in Emily's hands, her own hands trembling but resolute, and said that this was not an ordinary gift. It carried both legacy and secrecy, a sign that when the right moment came, Emily would know why Margaret had spent a lifetime keeping her safe, and why she had made choices Emily might never fully understand. That afternoon, Margaret had spoken of Emily's parents, of the people she barely remembered, from fragmented stories of the decisions made to protect both daughter and granddaughter from forces the world would never forgive, of connections too complicated to name aloud. Her voice carried sorrow, determination, and love. She emphasized that if someone ever recognized this scent, it would not merely be a sign of recognition, but of acknowledgement, a signal that the family's legacy and responsibility had been deliberately placed in Emily's care. Emily could still recall the sensation of that moment, the warmth of Margaret's fragile hands pressing the bottle into hers, the faint, haunting perfume drifting through the air, evoking afternoons in her grandmother's garden, unspoken secrets, and an unseen world that now felt suddenly near. Margaret's gaze had been solemn but full of trust, as if she knew Emily would one day be the only one capable of understanding everything she had left behind. She had told her to guard the perfume carefully, not for its material value, but because what it carried went far beyond anything Emily had ever known. Each time she wore it, Margaret said, it would become a bridge between past, present, and future, between sacrifice and choice, between what had been and what must still be faced. Emily remembered that final moment clearly. Margaret closing her eyes, a faint but peaceful smile on her lips, her hand still holding Emily's as though she could pass her strength and duty through touch alone. When her grip finally loosened, the air seemed to still, leaving Emily with a weight both heavy and luminous, the feeling that what she held was not merely a bottle of perfume, but a whole life's story, a heritage, and a secret whose meaning would reveal itself only when the time was right. That memory now washed over her amid the clatter of pots and the mingling scents of food and perfume, and she realized that her moment with Margaret had not been a farewell, it had been a beginning, the first note in a hidden symphony that would guide every choice to come, binding her to love, resilience, and the invisible inheritance carried within every breath of that scent. Emily slipped back into the rhythm of the indigo room, her steps light yet deliberate as she moved between tables, order pad in hand, and the practiced smile she offered every guest. The trace of perfume still lingered on her skin, a whisper of the moment she had shared with Margaret, a reminder of the responsibility and the secret she carried. The restaurant had grown busy now, its soft amber lights glowing over tables arranged with precise elegance. The air shimmered with the low hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, the mingled scents of food, and Emily's delicate fragrance, a sensory symphony both alive and suffocating, forcing her to hold steady within her role. She passed couples debating whether to share dessert, her gaze gliding over them, catching the smallest gestures of affection before offering gentle suggestions, setting water glasses at the perfect angle, presenting menus with her left-hand motions she had performed thousands of times, every gesture deliberate, though her mind wandered to Diane, to the worries and sacrifices her mother had endured for her. As Emily wove through the tables, the perfume seemed to grow stronger, its invisible thread following her every movement. Now and then she took a slow, quiet breath, remembering Margaret's words that this scent would lead her toward what she did not yet know, toward people who would recognize her in ways beyond understanding, and so she told herself to be ready for anything. In the kitchen, Marcus was consumed by the steady chaos of entrees and appetizers. He didn't look up, his focus absolute, but Emily could sense the discipline in his movements, the intensity that kept the restaurant's illusion of perfection intact. Out in the dining room, the last empty seats were filled, voices rising and falling in rhythmic waves, the aroma of food drifting in from the kitchen. Emily moved through it all, attuned to every detail, the flicker of a hand raised for service, the faintest tone of impatience, the quiet satisfaction of a guest taking their first bite. Serving wasn't just her job, it was a delicate art, a small symphony she conducted with both heart and precision, balancing grace and awareness in every breath. When she reached the final table by the window overlooking Charleston's quiet street, she inhaled deeply. The perfume's scent rose sharply now, rich and distinct, and something inside her stilled. It reminded her that there was more at play tonight than customers and kitchen orders, that somewhere in this golden-lit room were threads connecting her to a larger truth, to the unknown figures about to step quietly into her life. In that moment, the restaurant seemed to open into something beyond itself, an unseen doorway, where past, present, and future brushed against one another. Her heartbeat quickened. Anticipation, almost cinematic, rippled through her as if destiny had drawn breath beside her. Emily realized then that tonight the Indigo Room was not merely her place of work, it was the threshold of change. Something Margaret's scent had long foreshadowed was stirring at the edge of perception. A whisper of fate woven into laughter, voices, and the fragrance of food. A quiet promise that before the night was over, everything she knew would begin to shift forever. As Emily bent over to serve a couple debating which dessert to share, an odd sensation rippled through the air of the restaurant. The laughter and conversation seemed to falter for just a heartbeat, and she sensed it a shift, subtle yet unmistakable. Someone had entered through the main door. The sound of his footsteps was unhurried, measured, yet carried a quiet authority that bent the room around it. It was Adrian Calder. He stopped in the center of the dining hall, his gaze sweeping coldly across the room before it landed on Emily. In that instant, an inexplicable stillness spread through the space, as though every other sound had been hushed to make way for this singular presence, one that only she seemed to truly perceive. Emily lifted her head, and for a fleeting second their eyes met. The fragrance on her skin, the perfume Margaret had entrusted to her, unfolded more vividly, intricate and commanding, a private symphony only someone attuned could recognize. Adrian inhaled sharply, his body tensing, shoulders drawing tight, fingers trembling just slightly before he regained control. His eyes closed for a single breath, as though absorbing every sense, every memory, every buried signal carried by that scent. Emily could feel the gravity of his gaze, not threatening, not gentle, but something else entirely, something that read the unseen lines of her life, something that recognized her in a way that defied logic. No one else noticed the change. The room still buzzed with movement and chatter, but for Emily, time seemed to slow. Her heartbeat quickened, her palms dampened as she struggled to maintain her composure. She placed a water glass with practiced precision, handed a menu with familiar grace, but her thoughts were blank, fixed only on Adrian and the way he responded to the fragrance that had once belonged to Margaret. He began to move, slowly, toward the window table, the same one Emily had just finished serving. He didn't speak, didn't look at anyone else. He simply stood there, body slightly tilted as he breathed in once more, as if confirming something vital. And in that moment, Emily understood. His presence was not coincidence. He was not an ordinary guest. He was the beginning of whatever her grandmother's scent had been warning her about all along. Emily tried to continue working, delivering drinks, smiling politely, but every step Adrian took seemed to pull her closer, like the invisible pull of a storm gathering at the edge of calm. She could feel his eyes following her every motion, reading something in the smallest gesture, each heartbeat turning into a message exchanged in silence. The perfume became a language between them, unseen but unmistakable, a signal of recognition Adrian had been waiting for. As he walked toward the bar, his gaze never leaving her, the entire restaurant seemed to shift under a new kind of light. What had been ordinary a moment ago now felt charged, alive with possibility and danger. Emily knew, deep down, that nothing would be the same after tonight. Every familiar movement, every routine gesture was now threaded with tension, as if the world itself were holding its breath. And within that stillness, the fragrance Margaret's legacy had become a key, unlocking the door to a realm Emily had never imagined, a world that had been waiting, quietly, for her to step inside. The atmosphere inside the Indigo Room shifted in an instant, tightening with a tension that defied explanation. Adrian stepped into the center of the dining hall, his voice low and commanding, each word landing like an order that allowed no refusal. Everyone out. Now. Emily froze where she stood, her order pad still in her hand, as if the world had just stopped turning. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Chairs scraped. Guests exchanged bewildered glances, but no one dared to question the tone that had silenced the room. Adrian didn't raise a hand or make a gesture. He simply stood there, tall and unmoving, his gaze locked on her. The authority in his voice carried something elemental, an instinctive weight that compelled obedience. Within moments, the soft chaos of dinner service dissolved into a strange quiet. Couples left half-eaten desserts behind. A businessman grabbed his briefcase and slipped out. Waiters gathered plates in silence. and the vibrant hum of the restaurant drained away until only the hum of the air conditioner and hurried footsteps from the kitchen remained. Emily's heart pounded so loudly she could hear it over the stillness. Fear, confusion, and curiosity tangled in her chest. She took a tentative step toward him, her voice trembling yet trying to cling to professionalism. "Sir, I'm not sure I understand." Adrian's eyes met hers, steady, unblinking. His reply came calm, even, yet impossible to resist. "No one leaves, except you." The air around him seemed to thicken with the quiet pressure of control. Emily could sense the rhythm of his breathing, the faint tightening of his jaw, the subtle shift of his stance, each movement deliberate, carrying a meaning she could not yet name but instinctively knew mattered. She stood by the window table she had just cleared, surrounded by the ghost of the room's former noise, realizing that every rule of service, every principle of composure, every piece of her training was suddenly irrelevant. Everything now was dictated by the presence of one man she didn't know. Adrian leaned forward slightly, his tone still low but unwavering. "You'll stay and listen. Everything you need to know begins now. No one else interferes." "I know." A current ran through her, part adrenaline, part terror. Her fingers clutched the order pad, knuckles pale, and the faint scent of her perfume seemed to rise again, surrounding her like an invisible thread that tied her to this moment, to Margaret's voice from another time. It was as if all along, she had been trained for something she hadn't understood until now. The staff retreated quietly into the kitchen. Marcus, the chef, gave only a brief glance before returning to his pans, as though this, too, was beyond explanation. Emily was left standing alone in the wide, silent space, the weight of Adrian's presence pressing into every corner. His power wasn't the kind that relied on noise or threat. It came from the stillness he commanded, the way the air seemed to bend to his will. And in that suspended moment, Emily understood. This was no longer a routine night at work. It was the beginning of something irreversible. The perfume Margaret had given her wasn't just a keepsake, it was the key to a door that had just swung open, leading into a world both dangerous and magnetic. A world where every word, every heartbeat, every choice would matter, and where the safe, ordinary life she had known had already slipped quietly out of reach. Emily stood by the window table, her order pad still clutched tightly in her hand, heart hammering so fast she could barely breathe. Fear and curiosity tangled inside her chest until they felt indistinguishable. Across from her, Adrian stood motionless, his gaze unwavering, his voice low but commanding. "You will stay here and listen to me. No one else is allowed to interfere. I did it." Emily's lips trembled as she tried to find her voice, holding onto the fragile shell of professionalism that was slipping fast. "Sir, I don't understand what's happening. Why did you shut down the restaurant? Why am I the only one who has to stay?" Adrian tilted his head slightly, eyes following her every movement, his tone calm but weighted with something immovable. "From this moment on, everything I say is for you alone, Emily. No one else. I need you to understand that you have no choice but to listen and cooperate, and I'm not asking for your permission. I'm demanding your full attention." Her body tightened. Her breathing came short and uneven, but she forced herself to stand steady, her grip on the order pad tightening until her knuckles turned white. She couldn't look away from him. Every small motion, every breath, every shift of his shoulders seemed encoded with a message she was supposed to decipher. Adrian began to move slowly around the table, his voice steady and unhurried. "You see, this isn't about threat or control in the way you think. I need you to be aware of what's unfolding. Every action you take will be observed. Every decision will have consequences. But no one else can understand what this means. Only you." Emily listened, her pulse echoing in her ears. Fear and fascination wound together until she could no longer tell which one was stronger. And then she noticed it, the perfume. The scent on her skin had changed something in him. Adrian's expression softened, just slightly, though the tension didn't leave his face. I don't know who you are," Emily said, her voice shaking but firm enough to carry. "And I don't understand why I matter this much to you." For a long moment, Adrian just looked at her, unblinking, his silence heavy enough to still the air between them. When he finally spoke, his words struck her like a blow to the chest. "That scent, I know it, I recognize it. It brought me here to you. You have no idea who your family really is, or what legacy Margaret left behind. But I do. I've been watching. And now, you're standing where the truth can no longer hide." Emily went still, her mind reeling. Fear, confusion, and something dangerously close to belief twisted together inside her. Every story her grandmother had ever told her, every cryptic warning about the perfume, every unspoken secret suddenly felt like a lock turning open. Adrian's gaze never wavered. His presence filled the space, solid, intense, but not cruel. Each word he spoke seemed to hang heavy in the air, reshaping everything around her. Emily realized that from this moment forward, nothing would be simple again. Every thought, every movement, every choice would be illuminated by something larger than herself. The scent Margaret had left her was no longer just a fragrance, it was a key, unlocking a world she had never imagined. And now, standing alone in that silent restaurant with Adrian Calder before her, Emily understood that tonight was the threshold. Beyond it lay truth, danger, and revelation. Beyond it lay the version of herself she had never known, the one Margaret had always known she would have to become. After a long, weighted silence, Adrian exhaled slowly, his eyes never leaving Emily. His voice, still low and steady, now carried a different undertone, not just authority, but a restless urgency she couldn't quite define. "Emily," he said, each word deliberate, "I've told you what you need to know for now, but this is only the beginning. The information you'll need to understand your family and what Margaret left behind will come in time. What matters tonight is that you stay silent and prepare yourself." His words hung in the still air of the empty restaurant, heavy and precise, each syllable seeming to settle in her chest. Emily could hear her heartbeat sync with the rhythm of his voice, feel the pulse of something she didn't yet understand running through her. Then he reached into his coat pocket and handed her a business card embossed, thick, elegantly simple, only his name, Adrian Calder, and a single local phone number. No title, no company, no address. It was a message in itself. Whatever this was, it was personal and it was secret. Emily turned the card over in her hand. It felt heavier than paper should, as if it contained more than contact information, as if it were the key to a door she hadn't known existed. The air around them seemed charged with quiet significance. She sensed that every choice from this moment forward would matter, that curiosity could be as dangerous as it was magnetic. The life she'd known, the one of tables, menus, and routines, had just begun to fracture. Adrian stepped back, his gaze still fixed on her. His tone was measured but absolute. "You will call that number at exactly 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, not before, not after. When you do, everything will begin. But tonight, all you need to understand is this: I found you, and your being here is no coincidence." Emily nodded faintly, her pulse quickening again. Fear and anticipation fused inside her, pulling in opposite directions. How could someone she had never met make her feel as though he already knew the shape of her life, as though they were connected by something older, deeper, something that lived in the scent clinging to her skin? Adrian lingered for a few seconds more, watching her with an intensity that seemed to pierce through thought. It wasn't threatening, it was verifying, as if he needed to be certain she truly grasped the gravity of this moment. Then, without another word, he turned toward the door, opened it quietly, and stepped out. Light from the hallway spilled across the polished floor, cutting a sharp line between presence and absence. Emily remained where she was, the business card pressed against her palm, her breath shallow, her heartbeat uneven. The silence felt enormous. She knew, with a clarity that frightened her, that tonight had marked a boundary. This was no longer the life she'd been living, it was the prelude to something vast and irreversible. The perfume on her skin, Margaret's scent, lingered like a reminder, whispering her grandmother's words. "When someone recognizes it, you will understand why you were kept safe and what you were being prepared for." Emily stood alone in the dim, emptied dining room, caught between awe and disbelief, the world outside still moving while hers had shifted entirely. The business card in her hand was more than a promise of contact, it was a summons, a beginning, a story waiting to be written, one bound to danger, secrets, and choices she could no longer avoid. And with that realization, she understood. The scent, the moment, and the man named Adrian Calder were the first notes of a fate that had finally found her. Emily returned to her small apartment after Adrian's departure, the business card still pressed tightly in her hand. The streetlight outside cast shifting reflections through the window, its glow slicing across the room and into her thoughts. She sat down at her desk almost immediately, opened her laptop, and stared at the screen with eyes too tired to focus, yet too restless to look away. Her fingers began to move, searching everything she could find. Adrian Calder, Margaret, every name, every connection her grandmother had ever mentioned in passing. Each search result made her pulse quicken. Articles, snippets, scattered mentions of people and deals she could barely comprehend. Adrian's name appeared only in fragments attached to shadowy business ventures, offshore investments, anonymous holdings. Margaret's name surfaced in old trade documents, obscure real estate transactions, and closed charitable trusts. And through it all, the perfume, its scent still clinging faintly to her skin, seemed to weave through the chaos like an invisible thread, binding names and events together in ways that defied reason. Emily leaned closer to the screen, eyes stinging, refusing to stop. She took notes, built tables, cross-referenced dates and details, trying to impose order on what refused to make sense. Her handwriting grew erratic as questions multiplied faster than answers. Logic dissolved into intuition, into a kind of desperate focus born from both fear and fascination. The scent on her wrist was faint but steady, a reminder of protection, of preparation, of something Margaret had always known she would one day need. Every new name, every unfamiliar company, every cryptic connection between Adrian and Margaret pulled her deeper into a world she had never imagined, one built on secrecy, wealth, and control. The more she uncovered, the more she realized she was no longer merely researching, she was trespassing into a history that had been hidden from her. Hours passed unnoticed. Her eyes burned, her fingers trembled, but she couldn't stop. Every detail felt essential, every link urgent. When fatigue threatened to cloud her focus, she pushed away from the desk, pacing the room with the business card in one hand and the perfume bottle in the other. The two objects seemed to mirror each other, one solid, one intangible, but both carried the same gravity, the same quiet demand for understanding. She drew in a long breath. The familiar scent filled her lungs, steadying her nerves. "Tonight, I won't sleep," she whispered to herself. "Not until I find at least one connection, one reason Adrian appeared, one truth about why Margaret entrusted me with this." The minutes stretched toward dawn. The glow of the screen painted her face in soft blue light as the fragments began. At last, to align names overlapping, dates intersecting, clues forming patterns she could barely comprehend. And somewhere amid that delicate lattice of names and secrets, Emily felt something shift inside her. By the time the clock neared sunrise, she understood this was no longer curiosity. It was initiation. Tonight marked the end of her ordinary life, and the beginning of something far more perilous. From this moment on, every breath, every decision, every step she took would be entwined with the legacy Margaret had left behind, the power Adrian embodied, and the lingering scent that had become both her guide and her warning. At exactly 10 o'clock, Emily held her phone in both hands. Her heart beat so fast she could feel its vibration through her fingertips. The light from the window fell across the cold glass screen, and with a deep breath, she dialed the number printed on Adrian's card. Each second stretched unbearably, as though time itself were resisting what was about to happen. Her breathing grew shallow, her mind caught somewhere between fear, anticipation, and the pull of an unknown destiny. Then click, the line connected. Adrian's voice came through, low and steady, the same calm authority she had felt the night before. "You've found information. Not all of it, but enough to begin." Emily bit her lip, forcing her voice to stay level. I found some things, but I'm not certain what they mean yet." A quiet, knowing chuckle came from the other end of the line, not warm, but confident, controlled. "Of course not. What's public is only the surface of the iceberg. The truth lies beneath, where no one can reach it online. The things that matter most are spoken, not written, and only in person. I'll arrange for you to meet me and hear what you won't find anywhere else." As a potted, Emily shifted in her seat, nerves and adrenaline flooding her veins. Her eyes flicked toward the business card on the table, the simple piece of embossed paper that now felt like a passport into the world her grandmother had hinted at, a world of secrets, wealth, and buried history. Adrian's voice continued, calm but absolute. "A car will arrive for you in 20 minutes. It will bring you to a private location. No one else is to come. No phones, no recorders, just you, and your desire to understand the truth." Emily swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly dry. Part of her, the rational part, was screaming at her to stop, to recognize the danger in following a man she barely knew. But something deeper, stronger, whispered that this was inevitable, that she had been walking toward this moment long before she realized it. She drew in a shaky breath. I'll go." Her voice trembled, but there was steel beneath it. "Good," Adrian replied, his tone softening just slightly. "Then it begins. From the moment the car arrives, You will no longer be the person you were. Everything you know, your work, your assumptions, even the meaning of your past will change. Every choice you make will matter. When the call ended, Emily sat motionless for a long moment, the phone still pressed against her palm. Her body was alive with tension, a blend of fear, curiosity, and something that felt dangerously like excitement. Her gaze fixed on the card lying beside her laptop, its embossed letters catching the light. She imagined the road stretching ahead, the car gliding through the city toward a grand, unseen estate where Adrian waited. She could almost feel the weight of untold stories, the family secrets Margaret had never shared, the truth waiting behind that scent that still clung to her skin. Minutes passed in silence. The faint hum of the city outside felt distant, unreal. Emily could hear only her heartbeat, could feel only the pull of something vast and irreversible. When the clock struck 10:02, she stood, slid the business card into her bag, and took one final look around the apartment that had, until this moment, been her safe and ordinary world. She lifted her purse, straightened her posture, and walked toward the door. The morning air outside was sharp, full of promise and uncertainty. She could feel every cell in her body bracing for change. From this moment on, there would be no turning back. The ordinary waitress was gone. In her place stood a woman being drawn into something larger, a chain of secrets woven from scent, legacy, and fate. As she stepped into the light, the perfume lingered softly on her skin, as though whispering one final message from Margaret. When someone recognizes the scent, you will understand why you were kept safe. Emily closed the door behind her and descended the stairs, her pulse racing toward what awaited her beyond the curb, a car, a meeting, and a world of power, danger, and revelation she could never have imagined. Emily sat in the back of the sleek black car, its tinted windows turning the city outside into a blur of shifting silver light. Her heart hadn't slowed since she'd stepped inside. She could feel every beat pulsing through her chest, each one echoing against the quiet hum of the engine. Her fingers tightened around Adrian's business card until the edges pressed into her skin. A strange mix of excitement and unease coursed through her veins, making her acutely aware of every breath she took, every movement of the car beneath her. She sat upright, her back against the seat, eyes fixed on the dark window, though she couldn't really see beyond it. Her reflection stared faintly back at her, nervous, expectant, alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. All she could focus on was her breathing, her racing heartbeat, and the thoughts spinning wildly in her mind. Adrian's calm, commanding voice, Margaret's quiet warnings, and the faint scent of the perfume that still clung to her skin, like a whispered reminder of what this moment truly meant. She remembered her grandmother's words about responsibility, about protection, about how the fragrance would one day lead her toward the truth. Now those words pulsed through her mind in rhythm with the car's movement, a soft, haunting melody guiding her deeper into something she couldn't yet define. She thought about everything she had uncovered the night before, the names, the documents, the fragments connecting Adrian and Margaret, all pointing toward something vast and hidden. Each turn of the car, each red light, seemed to pull her closer to that truth. The city outside flickered past like a reel of forgotten memories, unfamiliar, yet somehow destined. Her palms were damp, her breath uneven, but beneath the fear was a spark of curiosity she couldn't extinguish. Somewhere deep down, she knew this moment was the threshold her grandmother had prepared her for. Emily closed her eyes for a second, drawing in a deep breath. The perfume scent rose faintly in the air, warm, steady, and impossibly comforting. It reminded her that this wasn't a fall into chaos, but a passage, an initiation into the unknown world that had always been waiting for her. She thought of her choice, the quiet, deliberate decision to say yes, to step forward despite every warning echoing in her mind. Logic told her she should be afraid, that she was walking into danger, but intuition whispered louder, this is where it begins. The engine's hum deepened as the car turned onto a cobblestone drive. Through the tinted glass, Emily caught glimpses of tall wrought iron gates, their intricate patterns glinting in the morning light. Beyond them, the silhouette of a grand estate emerged, framed by rows of manicured trees and walls of flowering hedges that seemed designed to conceal as much as they revealed. She inhaled sharply, her pulse quickening again. Everything here radiated precision, every sound, every light, every movement seemed intentional, controlled. This was Adrian's world, elegant, secretive, powerful, and now she was being drawn inside it. The car slowed to a stop before the main entrance. For a moment, Emily didn't move, She closed her eyes and listened to her heartbeat, steadying herself. When the door opened, cool air brushed her face, and she stepped out slowly, one measured footfall after another. The gravel crunched beneath her shoes, each sound like the ticking of a clock marking the start of something irreversible. The estate loomed before her, beautiful, imposing, and impossibly quiet. The scent of the perfume lingered on her skin, as if urging her forward, reminding her that this was the moment Margaret had spoken of, the moment when safety and secrecy would part ways. Standing before the tall doors of the mansion, Emily understood. She was crossing into a world where every rule she had known would be rewritten. The familiar life she had clung to was gone, replaced by a landscape of secrets, influence, and opportunity. And as the doors began to open, spilling soft light across the marble floor, she took one last breath of the morning air, the scent of the perfume threading through it like a promise. From this moment on, nothing would ever be the same. Emily followed Adrian into a vast room bathed in alternating bands of light and shadow cast from the tall windows above. The air was a mixture of refinement and mystery. Everything from the polished floors to the heavy drapes seemed intentionally designed to impress and conceal at once. She stood in the center, her fingers still wrapped tightly around Adrian's business card, her pulse racing so fast it felt almost audible. The silence of the space made her own heartbeat sound louder, sharper, more fragile. Adrian turned to face her, his voice low but unwavering. "Emily, there is something you need to know about your family, about Margaret, and about what she kept hidden." Emily froze, eyes widening, every muscle in her body tensing as if bracing for an impact she couldn't name. "Margaret," Adrian continued, his words falling heavily into the still air, "was once married to a Calder, my family, and that union created connections you were never told about." The words seemed to ripple through the room, swallowing sound, bending time. For a moment, Emily couldn't breathe. Everything she had ever known about her grandmother, the stories, the warnings, the perfume shifted, tilting into new meaning. The memories she'd held onto so tightly now glimmered with hidden layers, as though she had been living inside someone else's edited version of her own history. Adrian stepped closer, his tone deepening, every syllable carrying the weight of something irreversible. "You are a direct descendant of Margaret and Calder. Your presence in my life is not coincidence, it's the consequence of a bloodline she protected for years. She kept the truth buried to shield you, to prepare you for this exact moment." Emily's chest tightened. Her breath came shallow and uneven. Her gaze locked on Adrian's face, searching for something: proof, denial, mercy, but finding only certainty. Her mind spun, every piece of research she had poured over the previous night snapping into place with terrifying precision. The perfume, the secrecy, the name Calder embedded in half-forgotten documents. It all fit now, forming the outline of a legacy both powerful and dangerous. Adrian's voice softened but remained firm. "The marriage between Margaret and my grandfather did not last long. But in that brief time, every decision she made, every layer of protection she built around you was deliberate. The perfume was not merely sentimental. It was a signal, an inheritance, a silent beacon meant to lead you here, to me, when the time was right." Emily swallowed hard, the air thick in her lungs. "Why?" she whispered, her voice trembling but determined. "Why did she keep this from me? Why didn't I know any of it?" Adrian met her gaze, his expression solemn, his eyes dark with the gravity of truth. "Because she wanted you to live freely for as long as you could. The Calder legacy carries power, yes, but also danger forces she couldn't control. She raised you outside of that shadow to give you peace. But peace was never meant to last forever. Now, it's time for you to understand who you are and decide what to do with that truth." The room seemed to still around them. Even the air felt suspended. The ticking of a distant clock became deafening, each second striking the realization deeper into Emily's consciousness. She was no longer just the woman who served tables, who worried about rent and her mother's care. She was part of something vast, something designed, guarded, hidden. Her blood carried stories that had been silenced, responsibilities she hadn't asked for but could no longer ignore. The faint scent of perfume rose from her skin again, warm, rich, alive, reminding her that this was what Margaret had been preparing her for. The truth, the bloodline, the crossing of two worlds. Her hands trembled, her pulse thundered. The shock of revelation mingled with a strange sense of inevitability, as though every choice she had ever made had been leading to this room, this man, this moment. Adrian stood silently, watching her with that same calm authority, his gaze steady but not without compassion. In that stillness, Emily realized this was more than revelation, it was initiation. From this point forward, nothing about her life would be ordinary again. Every decision, every word, every breath would be shaped by the legacy Margaret had guarded, and the Calder blood that now defined her. The scent on her skin was no longer just memory, it was her inheritance, and her destiny had already begun to unfold. Adrian's eyes held her with an intensity that felt almost physical, dark, steady, and full of truths too heavy to speak casually. His voice was calm but carried the weight of command, resonating through the wide, dimly lit room. The Calder family, he began slowly, is not merely a lineage. They are a network, an organization that has operated in the shadows for generations. Their influence stretches farther than governments, deeper than corporations. Every decision, every alliance, every silence is calculated. Power is their inheritance. Control their language. Emily didn't move. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. The edges of Adrian's business card dug into her palm, grounding her as the meaning of his words sank in. The air seemed to thicken around her. She remembered the fragments her grandmother had whispered about duty and protection, the perfume that had always seemed too deliberate to be merely sentimental. Now, it all felt like a map she was only beginning to read. Adrian's tone softened slightly, though it lost none of its gravity. Margaret understood what this world demanded: the price of power, the obedience, the moral compromises. She knew that if you were born into it, you would never be free. That is why she left. She didn't simply walk away, she built a wall between her bloodline and this world, one high enough to keep you safe. She planned every detail: your mother's upbringing, your anonymity, the life you've lived. All of it was protection, Emily. And all of it was meant to last only until today. A grated stopped. The words cut through Emily like glass, slicing open the comfortable illusion of her past. Everything she thought she knew, her grandmother's gentleness, her quiet strength, even her secrecy, suddenly took on a new dimension. It hadn't been sentimentality, it had been strategy. Adrian paced slowly across the room, the light from the windows tracing sharp lines across his face. In the Calder tradition, he said, every child is trained from birth, trained to understand power, loyalty, endurance. Margaret saw what that life would do to her daughter, and to you. She saw the manipulation, the violence disguised as order, the duty masquerading as destiny, and so she broke the chain. But even as she fled, she left behind signals, threads only her blood could follow. The perfume was one of them. Emily's breath hitched. The faint scent on her wrist suddenly felt alive again, warm, knowing, almost sentient. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. When someone recognizes it, you'll understand why you were kept safe. Adrian stopped in front of her, his expression firm but touched by something almost gentle. Margaret never severed all ties. She left markers, hidden records, patterns, the scent you wear to ensure that when the time came, her bloodline would find its way back. That's why you're here. You weren't discovered by chance. You were summoned by the legacy she left, and the choices she made to bring you to this moment. Emily's throat tightened. The weight of his words pressed against her chest like the air before a storm. Every instinct told her to run, yet her curiosity bound her to the floor. The perfume's fragrance mingled with the faint scent of polished wood and sunlight, and she understood this wasn't a keepsake. It was a signal, a key. Adrian's voice lowered, the authority still there but tempered by something almost compassionate. Now you see why Margaret left, why she hid the truth, and most of all, why you must decide what comes next. The Calder world is built on secrecy and influence. But you... He paused, meeting her eyes with quiet conviction. You have something none of us were given. The choice to walk in freely, or to turn away. Emily stood motionless, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. Each word seemed to burn itself into her consciousness. The faint scent of the perfume surrounded her, steady and haunting, as if her grandmother were standing somewhere nearby, watching, waiting. She realized that this moment the truth, the legacy, the revelation wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. From now on, every step she took, every word she spoke, every breath she drew, would ripple through the legacy of a family she had never known, but could no longer deny. The Calder blood was hers, the choice was hers, and the scent that had once been comfort now carried destiny in its wake. Adrian paced slowly across the marble floor, his gaze never leaving Emily. His voice was low, deliberate, and carried the quiet gravity of someone revealing a truth that could not be undone. "Emily," he said, "the perfume Margaret gave you was never meant to be a keepsake. It was a signal, a mark, a language only those bound by our bloodline can understand. It is how Margaret ensured you would one day be recognized, not as an outsider, but as the unacknowledged heir, the one the family refused to name, yet was destined to exist, protected from afar." Emily's pulse thundered in her ears. Her breath quickened, every word from Adrian illuminating fragments of memory she hadn't known were connected. Margaret's warnings, the scent that always lingered longer than seemed natural, the way her grandmother's eyes had softened when she handed her the bottle. It all coalesced into a single realization: the perfume was never about beauty or nostalgia. It was a code, an heirloom of power disguised as tenderness. Adrian's voice deepened, calm but weighted with conviction. Margaret knew that if you grew up unaware of your heritage, unprepared for the reach of this family's influence, you would never survive it. So she chose to leave you a bridge, a token so intimate, so personal, that when the time came, it would reveal the truth without words. The perfume was her map. And now, you are standing at the point where every path she set in motion converges. Emily swallowed hard, her throat dry, her mind racing to catch up with the meaning of what she was hearing. Her eyes drifted toward the glass bottle resting on the table nearby, faintly illuminated by the streak of afternoon light. She saw it differently now, not as a relic of her grandmother's affection, but as a declaration of identity. She could almost feel again the warmth of Margaret's hand pressing it into hers, the tremor in her grandmother's voice when she had said, "Keep it safe, Emily. One day, you'll understand." And now she did. She was not merely someone who had been shielded. She was someone chosen, entrusted with a legacy so meticulously concealed it had taken decades to reveal itself. Adrian stepped closer, his tone firm but not unkind. "Do you understand now, Emily? That scent, it was never meant to comfort. It was meant to distinguish, to tell us who you are when the world no longer could. When I first sensed it, I knew. The perfume identifies you to us, the chosen, though unacknowledged, heir. Your presence here signals that the balance of this family may yet change. You are both a reminder of what Margaret defied, and a continuation of what she began." Emily felt her body tense, her skin tingling as though the air itself had grown electric. The scent she wore seemed to bloom again, deep and alive, wrapping around her like a veil that connected past and present. It was no longer just fragrance, it was a language, and she was finally fluent in its meaning. Adrian's gaze softened, but his words carried the quiet finality of a vow. "You are the only one who can read the signal, the heir this family never recognized, but Margaret did. And now, you must decide how to step into this world with the full knowledge of the power, the danger, and the inheritance that come with your name. This is not an invitation, Emily. It's an awakening." Her heart pounded against her ribs. The pressure of his words, the enormity of the revelation, pressed down and lifted her all at once. She glanced at the perfume bottle again, its glass shimmering like a portal to something both ancient and intimate. In that moment, she understood this was no longer a story she was standing outside of. She was part of it. The scent on her skin was both a key and a compass, guiding her through a labyrinth of secrets that stretched across generations. Her destiny was no longer hidden. It had been waiting for her scent to be recognized. And as the faint, familiar fragrance filled the air, Emily realized she was no longer just observing the Calder legacy. She was stepping into it. The perfume, once a memory, had become her map. The bloodline, once a myth, had become her burden. And the world Adrian represented was no longer a mystery. It was her inheritance, her test, and the beginning of everything that was yet to come. Several days after entering Adrian's world, Emily was seated at her small desk, surrounded by scattered papers and half-scribbled notes detailing the tangled history of the Calder lineage. Her concentration was sharp until the simultaneous sound of the doorbell and the phone shattered the silence. Her heart jolted. She hesitated, then rose and opened the door. Two strangers stood there, both dressed in tailored suits that carried the unmistakable weight of authority. The woman, mid-50s, silver hair pulled into a tight knot, radiated the kind of discipline that belonged to institutions, not individuals. Beside her stood a man in his early 40s, his eyes observant, intelligent, but carefully guarded. They presented their badges in unison. "FBI," the woman said evenly. "We'd like to speak with you about an incident that occurred at the Indigo Room a few weeks ago." Emily's pulse spiked. The walls of her apartment suddenly felt closer, her breath thinner. Adrian's warnings echoed faintly in her memory, She took a slow inhale, grounding herself, the card he had given her still between her fingers, its edges pressing lightly into her skin like a reminder of restraint. "Of course," she said, her voice calm and courteous, rehearsed by instinct. "But I'm just a server. I don't know much beyond what happened in the dining area." Free. The female agent studied her for a long moment, the kind of look meant to test cracks in composure. The male agent jotted something in a small notebook but said nothing. The silence stretched just enough to make the air heavy. They began with simple questions: what she saw, who was there, what time the restaurant had closed. Emily answered evenly, keeping her tone soft but unwavering. She mentioned nothing about the perfume, nothing about Adrian, nothing about the strange tension that had hung in the air that night. Every word she offered was factual, verifiable, and harmless. The agents exchanged glances. The woman's expression tightened, but she didn't press. The man leaned forward slightly. "A guest reportedly ordered the restaurant cleared. Did you find that unusual?" Emily met his eyes. "It wasn't my place to question it. Management approved. I just followed instructions." The conversation continued in this careful dance for nearly 20 minutes. The agents tried different angles, tone shifts, silences, unexpected pauses, but Emily stayed steady, giving them just enough to seem cooperative, never enough to be useful. Each time their questions turned sharper, she felt her pulse quicken, but she hid it behind the same measured calm that Adrian had taught her with a single glance. When they finally closed their notebooks, the woman offered a polite but thin smile. "Thank you for your time, miss." She let the name hang, watching for reaction. Emily simply nodded. Moments later, the door shut behind them. Emily stood in the stillness, listening to their footsteps fade down the hall. Only then did she realize how tightly she was gripping the card in her hand. Her knuckles had gone pale. She exhaled slowly, the tension leaving her body in tremors. She had done it. She had survived her first real test. Her phone rang almost immediately. "Emily." Adrian's voice, low and unhurried, filled the line. "They came, didn't they?" "Yes." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "And you said nothing?" "I said nothing." "Good," he replied, the single word heavy with approval. "Silence is your armor now. You chose correctly." When the call ended, Emily set the phone down and leaned back in her chair. The apartment seemed different, quieter, sharper, as though the air itself had shifted to match her new reality. The perfume on her skin lingered faintly, warm and steady, reminding her of what she carried: the legacy, the secret, the protection. For the first time, she understood what Adrian meant when he said that silence was power. It wasn't fear, it was control, it was survival. Emily stood by the window, looking out at the faint line of the horizon. Her reflection in the glass was calm, composed, but her pulse still thundered beneath the surface. She knew now that every decision, every word, every breath would be weighed. The game had begun in earnest. The perfume scent lingered in the still air, subtle and unbroken. It was her signal, her inheritance, her vow. And as she stood there alert, silent, steady, Emily accepted what her grandmother had once understood too well. In a world built on secrets, silence was not weakness. It was the purest form of power. The moment the call with the FBI ended, Emily remained frozen in her chair. Her pulse thundered against her ribs, her fingers clenched so tightly around Adrian's business card that the embossed letters pressed into her skin. The silence in the apartment felt heavy, electric, until her phone rang again. She hesitated for a heartbeat before answering. Adrian's voice came through, low and commanding, but with a measured calm that made her heart race faster. "Emily," he said, "I'm going to give you a choice. A single opportunity. It won't come again. Do you want to hear it?" Emily drew in a slow, shaky breath, her lungs tight with tension. "Yes," she said quietly. "I want to hear it." His tone didn't change, but every word seemed to carry the weight of consequence. "You can continue living your life as it is, working, serving, staying silent. But know this, you'll be watched. Every movement, every connection, every whisper of contact between you and me, between you and the Calder name, will be monitored. Your safety will depend on distance and compliance. Or..." His pause was deliberate, almost intimate. "You can choose to step inside the network I've built, the protection system Margaret and I designed years ago for people like you. You'll be trained, supported, and equipped to defend yourself and those who matter to you. You'll understand the mechanisms of power rather than being caught in them. Emily's breath quickened. The room felt smaller, charged. A strange blend of fear and anticipation coursed through her veins, as if her body already knew this decision would change everything. She thought of Margaret of the perfume, the words of warning disguised as tenderness, the way her grandmother had prepared her without ever saying why. Everything, every memory, every unanswered question had led here. Adrian continued, his voice steady, the rhythm of a man accustomed to shaping lives. Inside the network, you'll no longer be an observer. You'll learn to analyze, to anticipate, to protect yourself and anyone connected to you. Rosa, one of my longest-standing partners, will oversee your integration. You'll be guided, but never controlled. Knowledge will be your defense, discipline your freedom. Emily's fingers trembled around the card. And if I say no? She asked softly. If you refuse, Adrian replied, you'll remain protected, but only at a distance. Every contact will be restricted, every movement evaluated. The walls around you will keep you safe, but also confined. However, if you accept, you'll step into a world that won't just shelter you, it will empower you. You'll learn how to move unseen, how to decide without permission, how to own the choices that will shape your future. Safety and power always come at a cost, Emily, but the cost is yours to measure. Emily stood slowly, her body trembling but her mind growing sharper by the second. She walked to the window, the morning light cutting across her reflection, illuminating the quiet determination taking root behind her eyes. The perfume still clung faintly to her skin, a whisper of Margaret's protection, her promise, her test. She thought of the agents at her door, of the questions she had deflected, of the silence she had turned into armor. This was the next step. The moment Margaret had prepared her for. I accept, she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper but steady enough to make her own heart skip. There was a pause on the line then. Adrian's tone softened, though the command remained. Good. From this moment on, everything changes. You will not be who you were before. Every choice, every action, every word will matter. You will be guided, trained, and protected, but the decisions will be yours. This is what Margaret wanted for you, a life of awareness, control, and choice. Welcome, Emily. The network begins now. The line went silent, but the echo of his words lingered in the air. Emily stood by the window, the card still in her hand, the scent of perfume wrapping around her like invisible armor. The fear hadn't disappeared, it had transformed into resolve. For the first time, she felt not like a bystander in her own story, but a player. The rules were unclear, the stakes immeasurable, but the path was hers, and as she looked out at the city below, its noise, its danger, its endless possibilities, Emily understood that she had stepped into a new existence, one where power and peril would always walk beside her. But this time, she would walk willingly. The next morning, Emily stood before Adrian's mansion, the air crisp and charged with possibility. Her heartbeat was quick but steady now, an echo of anticipation rather than fear. The card with Adrian's embossed name rested in her palm, warm from her touch. When she pressed the doorbell, the soft chime seemed to signal the closing of one life and the opening of another. Rosa appeared at the entrance, a composed woman with calm authority in her posture and eyes that missed nothing. "He's expecting you," she said, her voice even and precise. As Rosa led her down the marble hallway, Emily noticed how silence seemed to be curated here, every sound absorbed by walls that whispered of discipline and control. The office they entered was bathed in muted daylight. It smelled faintly of leather, cedar, and something subtler, perhaps the perfume she wore, still clinging to her like a secret. Shelves lined the walls, filled with legal texts and neatly labeled binders. The furniture was minimalist but solid, the kind that spoke of permanence. Adrian stood near the window, his silhouette outlined by the morning light. When he turned, his expression was unreadable, but his gaze steady. "Emily," he began, his voice low, measured, and deliberate. "This will be your workplace from now on, a legal division I fund, operating within full legitimacy. Here, you'll review documents, analyze evidence, and assist in making critical but lawful decisions. There will be no involvement in anything illegal. This is about discipline, precision, and protection. For you, for your family, and for the legacy you now represent." Emily took a slow breath, her eyes sweeping the room, the glint of polished brass, the soft hum of the computer, the scent of new paper mingling with sunlight. Every detail felt deliberate, designed to remind her that she had stepped into a realm where control was both currency and armor. Rosa moved beside her and handed her a tablet. "We'll start with basic case files," she said gently but with quiet authority. "You'll learn to classify, cross-reference, and extract key data. Everything you touch here is confidential. Accuracy isn't just expected, it's survival." Emily nodded, absorbing every word, her mind sharpened by the blend of pressure and purpose. She thought of Margaret, the gentle firmness of her hands, the careful tone in her warnings, the perfume that now pulsed faintly from her wrist like a silent heartbeat. Every step she'd taken since that night at the Indigo Room had been guided by that scent, that signal. Adrian's voice anchored her again. "This work demands clarity, empathy, and restraint. You will assist in matters of legal strategy and protection tasks that ensure the family's safety, its continuity, and its integrity. You'll have resources, autonomy, and guidance. What you build here will define your standing, both inside and outside this network, and as upon it." The words settled into her like a contract. Emily felt the familiar tension return to her chest, but this time it wasn't fear, it was gravity, significance. She sat at the desk, Rosa indicated, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened the first file. Lines of text blurred, then sharpened, her focus pulling them into clarity. Numbers, dates, signatures. They weren't just details anymore. They were pieces of a system she was learning to command. Rosa hovered nearby, offering quiet direction, occasionally pausing to observe how Emily absorbed each task. The older woman's approval was subtle, a small nod, a softened glance, but it steadied Emily more than she expected. From across the room, Adrian watched in silence. His expression was one of quiet satisfaction, but his eyes carried something deeper: trust, expectation, and a recognition that the choice Emily had made was irreversible. The clock ticked softly. Sunlight drifted across her workspace. Emily's breathing evened as she began typing her first report. In that moment, she realized she had crossed the invisible line between witness and participant. The perfume on her skin was no longer just a memory, it was a mark of belonging, a reminder that she carried both inheritance and responsibility. She wasn't just serving a legacy anymore, she was shaping it. Her reflection in the polished desk looked steadier now, her shoulders squared, her gaze unwavering. The fear that had once paralyzed her had transformed into focus, the fragility of uncertainty replaced by quiet strength. Adrian turned toward the window again, the faintest hint of a nod acknowledging what she had become. Emily inhaled deeply, the air tinged with the familiar fragrance that had guided her through every turning point. It was no longer merely a scent, it was a vow. She was no longer the girl who once served tables in Charleston. She was Emily Calder, the protector, the analyst, the inheritor of a legacy built on silence, discipline, and choice. And as she bent over her first case file, the world she had once feared began to unfold not as a threat, but as a landscape she was ready to navigate. On her first official day in the legal division, funded by Adrian, Emily entered the office with her entire being taut in focus. Morning light streamed through the tall windows, slicing the room into planes of gold and shadow that fell across stacks of files waiting for her attention. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from the weight of awareness. Every motion, every breath, every decision now mattered. She took her seat at the wide oak desk, opened the first folder, and began to work. The paper was cool beneath her fingertips. She sorted documents, verified data, and underlined details that stood out: names, dates, signatures, coded references. Each notation felt like tracing the outline of a world she was only beginning to comprehend. Rosa stood nearby, composed and precise, her voice calm but carrying the gravity of authority. "Focus on patterns," she instructed softly. "Every discrepancy, every phrase out of place, these are not mistakes. They're signals. You'll learn to see what others overlook." 2, 3. Emily nodded, her pulse quickening as she absorbed each word. The rhythm of the work was both meticulous and hypnotic. She cross-referenced reports, traced timelines, pieced together fragments of correspondence that revealed something far deeper than simple transactions. Within hours, she began to discern a subtle architecture, a hidden order governing how the Calder network operated, veiled behind legal frameworks and corporate fronts. The deeper she read, the more she sensed it. An intricate web of influence where every contract, every signature, every seemingly legitimate decision carried undertones of power and intent. The line between the lawful and the concealed blurred until it became a single thread stretched taut across everything she touched. Her chest tightened, but her focus sharpened. This was what Adrian had prepared her for, the intersection between legality and control, the borderland where truth and strategy met. She began to recognize the hierarchy encoded in the documents, which names commanded respect, which figures existed to absorb blame, which alliances were built to last and which were meant to collapse on cue. Hour after hour passed. Emily filled her notebook with careful observations, phrases, initials, subtle changes in tone between correspondence. Rosa occasionally glanced over her shoulder, offering a quiet nod of approval or a short correction, her guidance as steady as a metronome. From time to time, Adrian himself appeared at the doorway. He said little, sometimes only a question, "What do you see?" or a quiet observation that drew her attention to a buried clue. His presence changed the air tense but grounding. When he spoke, it was never to dominate, but to refine her focus, as though sharpening the blade she was learning to wield. Emily found herself responding not with anxiety but with precision. Her notes grew cleaner, her questions more deliberate. The scent of her grandmother's perfume still lingered faintly on her skin, as though Margaret herself stood beside her, an unseen witness, a reminder of why this mattered. That fragrance had become her compass, the invisible thread linking the quiet discipline of the present to the legacy that had led her here. By late afternoon, the sun angled low through the glass, washing the room in a warm amber glow. Emily straightened from her desk, holding one of the files in her hand. The paper crackled softly as she looked toward the window, her reflection layered over the city below. She felt something powerful settle inside her, not triumph, not certainty, but belonging. She now understood the balance she was being trained to maintain. The legal world she served existed in daylight. The power behind it thrived in shadow, and she stood precisely between them, both observer and participant, scholar and sentinel. Every file, every annotation, every decision was a test of judgment and restraint. She could sense it now. Her life had split into two parallel currents, the lawful and the unseen, and her task was to navigate where they converged without losing herself. The scent of the perfume drifted upward again, soft but insistent, reminding her of Margaret's warning. One day, the truth will find you, and you will need to decide what to do with it. Emily inhaled deeply. She was no longer the uncertain girl who stumbled into a mystery. She was becoming its keeper. The work before her was no longer just paperwork, it was a map of power, risk, and inheritance. And as twilight began to settle over the Calder estate, Emily realized she had found her place in the story her grandmother began. She was the link between order and secrecy, law and legacy. From this day forward, every decision she made would shape not only her own safety, but the future of the family whose name she now carried in silence. That evening, under the muted glow of Charleston's skyline, Emily followed Rosa through the wrought iron gates of Adrian's mansion. The moment she stepped out of the car, she could feel it, an atmosphere of elegance so deliberate it verged on tension. Warm light spilled from the tall windows, brushing over oil paintings and marble columns, reflecting off the polished surfaces of antique furniture. The scent of aged wine and candle smoke mingled faintly with her own perfume, the one Margaret had left her, grounding her in the midst of everything unfamiliar. When they entered the main hall, the room came alive with the hum of quiet power. 6 men and 3 women stood around the long oak table, their laughter subdued, their words measured. Every gesture, every tilt of a glass, every glance exchanged was calibrated. They were people accustomed to control, and their poise held the same weight as weaponry. Adrian stood near the head of the table, his presence both magnetic and commanding. "This," he said, his voice resonant but unhurried, "is Emily." The word hung in the air. Family. He did not explain further. For a fleeting moment, all conversation ceased. 9 pairs of eyes turned toward her, curious, calculating, and faintly amused. Emily straightened her posture, forcing her breath to slow, offering a restrained smile. The warmth of the candlelight brushed her face, but she could feel her pulse echoing against her ribs. The perfume on her skin seemed to pulse with it, a silent reminder of Margaret's prophecy that one day, her scent would place her exactly where she was meant to stand. The first toast broke the tension. Laughter resumed, though nothing in the room truly relaxed. The people around her spoke in half-sentences, inferences layered beneath civility. To an outsider, their words might sound harmless discussions of investments, cultural foundations, philanthropy, but Emily began to catch the subtleties, The coded phrases, the euphemisms that masked negotiations, warnings, or veiled threats. Each word carried a shadow, each smile, an intention. Rosa hovered nearby, offering gentle cues, a tilt of the head, a quiet murmur to guide Emily through the social choreography. She whispered the unspoken rules: who to acknowledge, who to let speak first, when to remain silent. It was less a dinner and more a performance, one in which Emily was being tested not for knowledge, but for instinct. Adrian's attention never drifted far. His eyes followed her through the room, calm but unyielding, his expression unreadable. When he approached, the conversations around them seemed to fade. "You're observing well," he murmured, handing her a glass of wine. His hand brushed lightly against her wrist, an accidental touch that felt intentional. "Remember," he continued, voice low enough that only she could hear, "in this world people speak more through what they don't say." His proximity stirred something she couldn't name. The warmth of his tone, the steadiness of his gaze, it was protective, but also charged, the kind of closeness that blurred boundaries. She wondered if he meant to unsettle her or reassure her, perhaps both. As the evening deepened, the room shimmered with the muted sound of conversation and the soft clink of crystal. Emily drifted among the guests, each encounter teaching her something new. A passing comment revealed the shape of an alliance. A shared glance exposed a rivalry. She realized she was not merely present, she was being watched, weighed, evaluated. Her reactions, her silences, even the way she held her glass, all of it was being recorded in the quiet ledger of power that governed this house. Every so often, Adrian's hand on her shoulder steered her toward someone new, a diplomat's widow, a financier, an advisor whose smile was too thin to be genuine. Each introduction was another layer of initiation. She played her part flawlessly, smiling, listening, saying just enough. But beneath it all, her mind worked tirelessly, absorbing, cataloging, remembering. Hours passed. The wine darkened in the glasses. The conversations grew slower, more deliberate. Laughter came in controlled bursts. The air was heavy with perfume, cigar smoke, and secrets. From her place near the center of the room, Emily looked around and understood. This wasn't a dinner, it was a map. Every person here represented a thread in the web Adrian commanded, and tonight, she had been woven into it. She caught his eyes across the table. He raised his glass slightly, not as a toast but as an acknowledgement. In that brief exchange, she sensed the unspoken truth. She was no longer the outsider. Whether she liked it or not, she had become part of this world, its grace, its danger, its impossible intimacy. The perfume on her skin lingered like a vow. It was no longer just Margaret's legacy. It was her armor, her mark of belonging, and her warning. As the last of the candles burned low and the murmurs softened into the quiet rustle of departure, Emily stood amid the remnants of conversation and realized that she had passed her first test. She had learned to exist in a room where words were weapons, glances were transactions, and silence was survival. And as Adrian's shadow fell beside hers, she understood something even deeper. She was not merely being protected. She was being prepared. In the days following the dinner, Emily began to notice a sensation she had never known before, an undercurrent of emotion too intricate to be confined to the language of lineage. Whenever Adrian entered the room, his calm voice filling the space, his gaze deep and deliberate, something within her stirred a tension that felt both grounding and dangerous. His presence carried warmth, yet it also awakened an awareness she could neither suppress nor name. It started in subtleties. The way he brought her the kind of coffee she preferred without ever asking. How he lingered near her desk just long enough for their silences to mean something, or how his tone softened only when speaking to her. None of these gestures crossed any visible line, yet each seemed to draw one somewhere new, an invisible border between protection and connection, between power and tenderness. Emily tried to reason with herself. This was mentorship, she told her mind. Admiration, perhaps, but her body betrayed her calm. Her heartbeat quickened at the sound of his footsteps. Her breath faltered when his shadow fell across her workspace. It was not the kind of fear that came from danger, but the kind born of recognition of being seen. When Adrian spoke, the room seemed to slow. His words carried a weight that pressed against her chest, demanding not obedience but understanding. Every glance he cast her way felt deliberate, as if he were mapping her reactions, testing the balance between control and care. And every time their eyes met, she sensed a question neither of them could safely voice. She began to notice him differently, the curve of his expression when he listened, the quiet precision of his movements, the rare flicker of weariness that softened his authority. He wasn't just a figure of power anymore. He was human, layered, and disarmingly close. By late afternoon one day, as sunlight poured through the window and turned the air gold, Emily stood still by the glass, her reflection caught between light and shadow. The perfume on her skin, Margaret's legacy, lingered faintly, its scent merging with the weight of the moment. It was more than fragrance now. It was a thread tying her past to the uncharted space of her present, binding responsibility to desire, duty to choice. She exhaled slowly, her pulse sinking unconsciously to the memory of Adrian's voice, steady and low. She knew then that what she felt was no accident of circumstance. It was something deliberate, chosen, and profoundly human. This connection between them existed beyond logic or heritage. It lived in the quiet spaces between words, in the shared restraint that neither dared to break. Emily ran her fingers across his business card on the desk, tracing the embossed letters as though they held an answer. Her thoughts spiraled, half fear, half fascination. The boundaries of her world had shifted, and with them, the boundaries of her heart. What was this affection, reverence, attraction, or all three woven together? She didn't know, but she felt its gravity with startling clarity. It was powerful and fragile, safe yet perilous. It wasn't something inherited, it was something chosen, a connection born not from blood but from awareness, two lives drawn toward each other by trust, by timing, by the strange recognition that some bonds defy definition. In that quiet dusk, Emily understood. Whatever this was between her and Adrian, it would shape her as much as it tested her. It was both her refuge and her risk, both protection and temptation. And as the perfume's faint trail lingered in the fading light, she accepted that her heart had already crossed the line her mind had tried to guard. On a Tuesday afternoon, a call came from the healthcare center, the nurse's trembling voice informing Emily that Diane had declined rapidly. Her heart seemed to tighten in her chest as she gripped the steering wheel, driving down the familiar streets that now looked strangely different. Every building, every streetlight, reflected the weight of her fear. When she reached her mother's room, Diane was lying on the bed, her skin paper-thin, her hands trembling against the sheet, her breathing faint. Emily knelt beside her, gently taking her mother's hand, feeling the fragile, brittle bones that reminded her how finite time could be. Diane opened her eyes, their light dimmed, yet still full of love. "Emily, you came," she whispered, her voice frail but clear. Emily held her hand tighter, inhaling deeply to steady herself, listening to every breath, every heartbeat, every small motion, realizing how precious each second was. She thought of all the times Margaret had prepared her for moments like this, the faint perfume still clinging to her skin serving as a reminder of responsibility and legacy. Sitting beside the bed, Emily placed her hand over her mother's and felt the tremor, the delicacy of life itself, every breath a fragile thread that bound them together. The nurse explained softly that Diane was entering her final stage, her vitals falling fast. They had adjusted her medication and supportive therapy, but the decline could no longer be reversed. Emily remained composed, speaking gently, recalling memories from when Diane was lucid, their afternoon walks, the meals they cooked together, the jokes, the hard days they had survived side by side. Pain and helplessness washed over her, but within it she felt a profound connection. Every clasp of the hand, every shared glance was an unspoken language of love. Diane tried to smile, her eyes faint yet shining, seeing her daughter as a grown woman strong enough to face the world. Emily sat by her for hours, never leaving, responding to each faint breath, each furrowed brow with quiet presence and love. She told Diane about her work at the legal office, about what she was learning, the people she met, the world she was navigating. Diane listened, sometimes fading in and out, but a soft smile would appear, reminding Emily that her presence mattered. Every moment was both painful and sacred. Emily realized that, despite the power, responsibility, and intricate ties of the outside world, nothing compared to this, to being here, holding her mother's hand, listening, existing. She felt the fragility of life so acutely that it stripped away all illusions of control. Presence, care, and unspoken love mattered more than any influence or duty. Looking at Diane, Emily drew a deep breath, tears sliding down her cheeks, but her composure held, pain and warmth intertwined inside her chest. Sitting by the bed, her heartbeat fell into rhythm with her mother's fading breaths. In that stillness, Emily understood that this was her duty, her inheritance, and her love, all that Margaret, Adrian, and she herself had been preparing for and cherishing. Through the afternoon and into the night, she stayed beside her mother, speaking softly, sometimes simply sitting in silence, watching Diane sleep, studying each fragile motion, resting her hand on her forehead, on her fingers, on the sheet, reminding herself that every second was sacred, that love and presence were the only things that could comfort the delicate edge of life. Emily knew then that from this moment forward, every choice, every step she took would carry the weight of responsibility, love, and protection for her mother. Each breath, each glance, each touch became a bridge between the vast outer world of power and the quiet bedside world of tenderness. She stayed until nightfall, the lamplight casting a soft glow across Diane's weary face, pale, fragile, yet peaceful. Emily sat in silence, breathing deeply, absorbing the moment, knowing that this stillness was what gave her strength to face all that awaited her, the duties, the power, and the love she had been entrusted with, and that from this moment on, love and presence would forever be her greatest strength. On a quiet evening after days of tension, Emily received a call from Adrian. His voice, deep and warm yet serious, invited her to meet him on a small boat anchored at his private dock. When she stepped onto the deck, the scene before her felt both intimate and mysterious, the glow of the city fading behind her as the vast darkness of the ocean stretched ahead, waves lapping gently against the hull. The world seemed to narrow until it was only the two of them. Emily's heartbeat quickened with a blend of curiosity and apprehension. Adrian stood at the helm, his gaze steady and intent, the silence between them broken only by the murmur of the sea and the soft whisper of wind. She moved closer, her pulse unsteady, realizing that this was a pivotal moment, a turning point in both their relationship and her life. Adrian motioned for her to sit, his eyes following every movement, every breath, every flicker of reaction. When she did, a rush of nervous anticipation coursed through her. Slowly, Adrian opened a small velvet box on the table. Inside lay a delicate gold chain, holding a pendant, a single preserved drop of original perfume sealed in crystal. The light caught it and made it shimmer, as if telling its own story. Emily lifted it carefully, feeling its cool weight against her palm, a sensation that carried both gravity and meaning. The familiar scent rose faintly, sending a tremor through her as memories of Margaret and all her whispered teachings came flooding back. Every signal, every warning seemed to converge in this single moment. Adrian met her eyes, his voice low but commanding. "Emily, this is the original Profumi Ravellini. Its scent has passed through generations, from Isabella to Margaret, and now to you. It is a sign, a connection, a legacy, and a responsibility that I now entrust to you." Emily felt the magnitude of what he was giving her, the weight of faith, lineage, and power resting squarely on her shoulders. Her breath caught, her pulse raced. She could feel every heartbeat, every trace of the perfume, every ounce of tension between them filling the quiet air. Words were unnecessary. Both understood the significance of this exchange. Gazing at the tiny drop of perfume suspended in crystal, Emily realized it was not merely a gift but a testament to trust, to duty, and to a bond that transcended time. Adrian leaned closer, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur, half instruction, half warning. "Emily, by accepting this, you accept not only the legacy, but the responsibility to guard and preserve it. This is the link between generations, between the past and the present, and between you and me, a connection that defies ordinary definition." She felt the power of his words settle deep within her. His eyes were steady yet gentle, as his hand brushed lightly against hers, while placing the necklace in her palm, a gesture both tender and resolute. Emily understood it was a vow, an act of absolute trust, not merely material but profoundly spiritual. She pressed the pendant against her chest, breathing in the faint scent that carried echoes of Margaret, of power, of duty. Adrian stood near, watching her with an expression that balanced vigilance and protection. Emily felt safe, yet she also sensed the complexity of what lay between them, a current charged with both emotion and authority. Her heart fluttered between fear and excitement, between vulnerability and clarity. They sat together in silence, allowing the moment to unfold. The waves brushed softly against the boat. The sea breeze carried the faint, unmistakable perfume into the air. Emily understood that her life had just shifted course. The necklace was no ornament, it was proof of connection, of trust, of responsibility and feeling that stretched beyond time. Adrian's voice came again, steady and deliberate. "I am not asking anything of you tonight. Just understand and accept this bond. In time, everything will become clear." Emily closed her eyes and took a long, steady breath, absorbing every detail, the sound of the waves, the salt in the air, the fragrance that seemed to envelop her. She knew this was the moment she truly stepped into the world of legacy, power, and emotion. A world where every choice, every gesture, every heartbeat carried meaning. Holding the necklace close to her heart, the original scent still lingering in the air, Emily understood she was no longer merely an observer but a keeper, a successor, a bridge between generations. And this moment on the boat would remain etched in her memory as the point where past, present, and future converged, where legacy, responsibility, and feeling became one, where she finally grasped the depth and strength of her bond with Adrian and the family name she now bore. Emily stood on the deck, the dim light from the boat's headlamp shimmering across the surface of the water. Her fingers brushed against the pendant that held the original drop of perfume, its weight both heavy and comforting. Her heart stirred not entirely out of love, but from a profound awareness that this was her own choice, a conscious decision to step into the world that Margaret, Adrian, and the family legacy had quietly prepared for her. Adrian stood nearby, his gaze steady, his voice low and composed, never pressing. "Emily, are you ready to take on this role?" The question carried more than a sense of duty. It was about power, about the capacity to shape her own future. Emily drew a long breath, the faint scent rising from the preserved perfume drop, reminding her of past decisions of sacrifice, protection, and the lineage of strength passed down through generations. Closing her eyes, she allowed the tide of emotion to settle, realizing that this choice was not born of personal feeling or fleeting affection, but of agency, responsibility, and the will to govern her own life. "Yes," she said softly, yet with unshakable certainty, a word that was both affirmation and vow, made to herself and to the legacy she now carried. From that moment, Emily understood she was no longer a passive observer, no longer someone swept along by circumstance or emotion. She was now the one who acted, who decided, who would preserve and shape what came next. Adrian smiled, not a smile of tenderness, but of recognition, an acknowledgement of Emily's decision and the strength it carried. She pressed the necklace close to her chest, inhaling deeply, feeling the full weight, meaning, and connection it embodied. She knew that every step forward would rest upon this choice, upon the authority she had accepted, the duty she had embraced. And in that stillness on the boat, with the soft sea breeze brushing against her face and the lingering trace of the original perfume in the air, Emily felt herself transformed into the architect of destiny, the guardian of heritage, the active force within the story that Margaret, Adrian, and now she herself had written. This was not love. It was choice, a vital choice, one that rose above emotion, a decision that would define the rest of her life. And Emily had said, yes. Aposp. On her mother's final day, Emily sat beside Diane's bed, her hand resting gently over her mother's, feeling each fragile breath filled with love. Diane's eyes met hers with a flicker of clarity, as if trying to pass on peace and faith. Emily could feel the depth of all the love, sacrifice, and care her mother had given her throughout a lifetime. When Diane took her last breath, Emily closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks, her heart heavy with grief, yet overflowing with gratitude. Her fingers found the necklace holding the original drop of perfume that Margaret had entrusted to her, and she felt the weight of its meaning, the bond between generations, the continuity of legacy. In that moment, Emily understood that life is not only what we are given, but also the choices we make, the capacity to receive and nurture love, the strength to endure sorrow and keep moving forward. She knew a new chapter of her life began here, not merely one of duty or power, but of preserving family values, love, and responsibility toward those she cherished. Emily's story reminds us that love, sacrifice, and choice can shape a life, that presence and care for the ones we hold dear are the most profound human values of all. To our viewers, if this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, like, and share so you won't miss the next inspiring videos. We would love to hear your thoughts, share how this story resonated with your life. Tell us what you felt deep within your heart. Thank you for being with us today. We wish you good health, joy, and peace each day. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.